Hey everybody,
Hi there.
coming to you. Want to talk a little bit about marriage today, and we thought we'd talk about openness, honesty in marriage, and yeah, so just that idea that we would really share life, know each other, that our spouse should know our hearts. Really shouldn't be any secrets in a marriage. Yeah, so what would be the biblical basis for that?
I think, we have in the beginning, just Adam and Eve were created to share life together. And they needed each other. So there's a reason they needed each other.
Yeah, the language in Genesis 1, right? Let me read this. This is Genesis 2. It says in Genesis 2:24, therefore a man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. And that says, and the man and his wife were both naked and were not ashamed. And there's this state there where they knew each other. Mm-hmm. They were naked. Just that image, like you're exposed, you're fully known. Mm-hmm. They know you with your bumps and abnormalities and whatever, right? And that's that image of we think physical right away, but I think that reflects both in emotional, spiritual, like knowing each other, one flesh. Yeah. You don't hide things from yourself. You don't kind of keep things secrets from yourself. You're one flesh. And so I think that Genesis 1 passage is huge. Any others?
I think of just the idea of like what God has called us to as individual, as a husband and as a wife. Like He's called a husband to love their wives as Christ has loved the church, to live with her in an understanding way. If you live with someone in an understanding way and love them like Christ loved the church, you have to know them well. There has to be an intimacy there where you're getting to know them and they're getting to know you consistently. And then I also think, like, for a wife, she's called to be a support to her husband. She's called to submit and come under her husband. You can only do those things if you know the person. Like, I can't support you and be a helper to you unless I know what your needs are and who you are and what's going on in your heart. So it's not just a physical helping, it's a spiritual, it's a relational companionship helping there too. And then I think just the idea of love, we're called to, that idea of loving each other goes both ways. There's a loving and an honoring and a respecting and a valuing and cherishing of each other.
And trust, I think I'd add to that.
Mm-hmm.
You can't have a relationship of love without trust. And trust, you have to be open if you really trust. And when you're open, then you build trust. And so I think trust is a big deal. Yeah, that's good. Another thing we were talking about beforehand is just if you're struggling hiding things from your spouse or really being open with your spouse, Nicole mentioned just asking the question, ask yourself why not? Why am I not wanting to be open? What are the motives behind that? And sometimes we can say it's for our spouse, but I think deep down usually it comes back to us, why we want to hide, right? So things like shame, where we don't want them to know the dark parts of us or our past or whatever, right? What are some other reasons why sometimes we hide
I think often there can just be a level of self-protection, that we're fearful of just being known in general. And so I think there's a fear that maybe that we'll be judged, or a fear that our spouse isn't gonna love us anymore or care about us. With that exposure, like we're fear the exposure of what's going on. I think too, sometimes it's just a matter of I don't know, like we don't think they're gonna care. And so there's a fear there too of like what seems like a big deal to us, or maybe something I'm really struggling to, we fear their reaction because they won't see it as a big deal. So there's not just a genuine caring concern there that we're fearful of that, but it comes down to me trying to protect myself still in all of that, if that's my
Yeah, I thought also just like pride, and it goes along with all that. Like I want to keep up this image that I have. I want to maybe feel strong still or whatever. Where again, I don't want them to know my weaknesses. And sometimes it's just selfishness, where it's easier to keep things hidden and not have to have the difficult conversations. It's easier for my spouse not to get upset because I know if I share this with them, they might get upset. And so I'm just going to hide it, and it's easier. It's more comfortable, convenient for me. I think that tends to be a big reason. So I think just that, and there might be more. And we're not going to cover everything with this, but just that idea, like why, asking yourself, why am I hiding this? And if you feel yourself like, that reaction of I'm going to hide this, or I don't want to tell them, man, asking yourself, why not? What's going on? There might be a timing. There might be a right time and place sometimes for certain things. Most of the time, almost always, the vast majority of the time, like you should be living as one flesh in these areas. So now in this, there's probably caution in some areas. Like, we could go the other way to where I'm so honest and open with my spouse that, it doesn't go so well. What are some cautions that we need to think through in that?
I think we have to think about why. It kind of comes back to that question, like, if I'm not sharing, why not? And if I am going to share, why am I going to share? So am I sharing because I really just want them to know me and my heart and what's going on, and maybe I need help, or I'm struggling through something, or I'm really excited about something and I want to share that joy? Like, there's just a sharing, a commonality of like in life there. Or, am I sharing, if I'm sharing something that's maybe can be a harder discussion, maybe it's something way I was hurt, or something that they said, or something they're doing that needs to change. I think it's easy sometimes in those to have wrong motives. Like, we want them to fix something or change something. So I think we have to use caution in our words and what our goal is. Or if it's something against our spouse, or something our spouse did against us, then we need to make sure that we're having that conversation out of love and care for them. Not to justify ourselves, not to make ourselves feel better, or them to change for us or punish them or anything like that. So I think we need to be careful on that end. And then I also think, as we're sharing our heart, like, we can share, but if something's going to be hurtful to them, like, that doesn't need, like, we need to use our words with caution. And because again, like, the whole point of sharing needs to be to grow the relationship, to be open and honest. So sometimes it is saying those hard things. Like, the hard things have to be said, but our goal and motive can't be out of a heart that's vengeful or wanting justice done, because that's not our place.
The other thing I think we see sometimes is people just be honest just to vent. Like, they're just putting it out there, and in a way that sometimes it's gossip about other people, or sometimes it's just an emotional thing, and they're venting so much that they're not giving their spouse room to be honest and open about what's going on with them. I think that can be tough. And there are cautions in this, so be careful. And there are other dynamics, like if your spouse is not a believer, it's going to be have very different dynamics. If you have, maybe a background of distrust, man, you're going to have to rebuild this. So there's some challenging things here. So then we want to ask the question, like, how do we grow in this? Like, you might be in a place where it's like, I don't want to share anything, or I've never shared anything, it's just the way I am. And we're getting to this place where it's like, how do I grow to be open and honest with my spouse? So thinking through that, I think first thing I just say is, like, it'll be little steps. Like, just begin and take steps and move in the direction, right? It's not overnight where if this is a struggle for you, it's not overnight where all of a sudden you're just going to pour everything out and maybe you'd have this, but I doubt it, right? Maybe it's just little steps, but you're moving in a direction. I think that's huge.
Yeah. Sharing those just little normal daily things in life sometimes helps get you to share more of the big things too. Things that maybe aren't as big of a deal in some ways, or you don't think a lot of. It's just sharing about your day, or sharing you know, a joy or a struggle that day, or just, yeah, those tiny things that are, we think are commonplace things, but sometimes if we don't share, those are the best things to start sharing, so we can build up to a place of.
Yeah. And then the other thing we were talking about, there's probably more, but it's just the gospel. We have to believe the gospel, and then create a gospel culture in our marriage. So when it comes to believing the gospel, I have to believe that God knows me fully and still loves me in Christ. When I begin to believe that I'm accepted and loved by Him, then I am safe. I'm okay. I'm secure. I know that no matter how my spouse reacts to all my mess and, you know, my past or whatever is going on, I know I'm still accepted and safe in God's love, right? So I can be open and know that regardless, I have Christ. I'm accepted. I'm safe in Him. So I have to believe the gospel in order to feel safe enough and know I'm safe enough to then be open with my spouse.
But I think I also have to believe the gospel and understand the love and the grace and the patience and the gentleness and the care that God has shown me, so that when my spouse comes to me and is open, then I can extend that same grace and mercy and care towards them. I can take the things that might be harder that they need to say with humility, instead of defensiveness, because I'm already grounded and secure in the gospel and who I am in Christ, and they can't say anything worse about me than what Christ already knows and what He already died for. And so I think that just being rooted in the gospel goes both ways, whether we're being the person who's opening up more or the person who's allowing the other person to open more. We have to know who we are in the gospel and extend that grace and mercy.
Yep. And I think we maybe just close with this, like, is your marriage a safe place to express and be open and honest with all your warts and messiness, right? Is your marriage a safe place to do that? Are you extending the kind of grace you've received in the gospel? And when it is that, it's so much easier to be open, to be honest, to be one flesh, one heart, to be naked and not ashamed before each other. Not because you're good, have it all together, you've impressed your spouse. We got over that a long time ago, right? But because you know you're in Christ, hidden in Him. You're clothed in His righteousness. And so you can be open. And you know your spouse understands grace and will extend grace to you. So anyways, any last thoughts?
I was just thinking when you were talking about that, just the other thing is our spouse already sees all of it, and I think the thing that we actually make it harder on ourselves if we're not open and not having these conversations, because our spouse is aware that something is off or something is wrong, or they see us struggling in our sin or whatever it is. So us not being willing to have these conversations and sharing life is actually pulling us farther away from each other. But in a sense, there is a natural exposure that comes just from living in the same household. And so I think when we can be secure in the gospel and say, like, okay, like, I'm not ultimately exposed before God, and my spouse sees a lot of this anyways, they just might not know everything going on inside. There's just a freedom when we can actually share that, because now we are being honest with our struggles, and then there can grow that sense of just trust and just the sweetness, I think, that comes from really knowing. I mean, I know that for myself back, just years ago, it was hard for me sometimes to share about certain things or talk about certain things, even though I knew Tim was seeing them. It was almost like I had to admit that I was struggling with that, and that was my pride. I didn't want to admit that, but when I did, there was such a sweetness that came from it, and just we got to love each other and practice loving each other as Christ loves us, really. So. And
that's another part of this. Like, God is giving you your spouse, if they're a believer, to help you. Mm-hmm. And so you're withholding the blessing that they would get to be to you, and you're withholding the blessing that you could receive, the help you could receive if you were honest and open with them. So that's God's design, is for us to be helping each other follow Jesus as spouses. Mm-hmm. It's a big part of this. So big part of what marriage is about. So anyways, lots to think about. Continue the conversation on your own offline, but hope that was helpful. And we love you guys.
Have a good weekend.
See ya.